So in this recording, I'm going to do a walkthrough of using VMware Workstation on a PC. It's going to be very similar if you use VMware Fusion on a Macintosh. So I've got VMware Workstation version 7.0 here that I'll load up. So what virtualization does is it basically takes a clone of your existing hardware of the system that you're running on right now. It allows you to run multiple operating systems at the same time. So for instance, here's an instance of Linux that I have running. So I can work on this Linux system and do everything I need to do while still having this is considered my host operating system from which I'm running the VMware virtualization. So there's a number of different products for virtualization. VMware Workstation is one that University of Cincinnati has a license with, and it's generally a leader in virtualization, but there's also a number of others. Sun has one called VirtualBox that runs pretty well, and the benefit of that is that it is free. As a student of UC, you can get VMware Workstation for free, but outside of being a student, you'd have to pay for that. So VirtualBox is a decent one, and there are a few other alternatives as well. So we're going to walk through actually creating a virtual machine, then we'll talk about VMware Workstation a little bit more and how to use it, etc. So we're going to go and create a new virtual machine. So I'm going to say File, New Virtual Machine. And it has a wizard here. And you can have a typical wizard to create a virtual machine or a custom. I like doing custom so I can choose specific options that I want to use. So it asks you what compatibility you want the virtual machine to be. So by default it's the highest, but if you're going to share this with, say, on a Macintosh, you may want to create it for Fusion version. Actually, it's compatible with that. Maybe if you're going to a computer with a lower version of Workstation, you may want to choose that. And this says, okay, where's the installation disk that you're going to install this operating system from? So you can actually use a physical disk and put it in your host operating system. But what we like to use more often in virtualization is an ISO file, which is basically physical disk's contents that have been put onto a single file. And so in the lab and here on my computer, I've got a group of virtual machine ISOs, or disk images that I can choose from. I'm going to install Windows 7, which is here on the C drive. So I'm going to go ISO image and browse to that. Hit next. So here it's going to ask for a product key. You can type that in later if you'd like. If you have it, you can go ahead and type it in. I'm going to just leave it blank for now. It asks you what you want the virtual machine to be known as, and this is just within VMware. So this is CentOS 64-bit. This isn't the name inside of the virtual machine. So this is going to be fine. Then it asks you where you'd like to place the virtual machine files, which can get pretty big. So if you want to, your default in the lab is going to be in your home folder, so nobody else can get to it. But if you want to be able to use it at home and such, you may want to browse and put it on an external disk that you have or something like that. So I'm going to put it on this V drive, put a new folder for Win 7. Okay. How many virtual processors you want to give it? How much RAM do you want to allocate to this virtual machine? So you're limited by the physical RAM that's on your host computer, and it shows you kind of how much RAM you've got available here. What I like to do is bump it up when I do an installation of an operating system to make it go faster. but then I take it back down to a lower RAM afterwards, because you can change that later, so we can run multiple virtual machines at the same time. So I'm going to boost this up some. Go from there. As to what type of networking you want to set up, so bridge networking says attach it to the same network as the host operating system. So attach it as if it's a whole new physical computer plugging into the network. You can use NAT if you have a limited number of IP addresses. It also has some security as well. Host only would mean that this virtual machine couldn't get out to the internet, so it can only interact with other virtual machines in the host, or not to use a network connection. So I'm going to use bridged here. Ask you what type of SCSI adapter you want to use. Here, if you have an existing virtual machine disk, you can use it here, or a physical disk, you can attach it here. But generally, we're going to create a new virtual disk. And this is going to hold the entirety of our virtual machine. This is going to end up being a single file on our host operating system's file system. And what type of virtual disk, SCSI or IDE. How much virtual disk space you want to allocate to it. So what's going to happen here is it's only going to, on your host operating system, it's only going to take up how much space is being used inside the virtual machine. So don't worry about hitting 40 gig and it taking up 40 gig on your hard disk unless you start filling this thing up. By default, it won't fill it up. If you click this button, it will take up 40 gig on your host operating system. We usually don't do that on Workstation, but for VMware Server products, we'll do something like that because it does take a little bit of a performance hit by having this file expand as it needs to. And then the default is to store it as a single file, or we could have it stored as multiple 2 gig files, and this is if, we may have to do this if our external hard disk is formatted in such a way that it can't take large file sizes. And what we want to name this virtual disk, the default is fine. At this point, if you hit finish, it would power it on. I'm going to click Customize Hardware to show you some other customization we can do. So you can see by default it's going to install the USB controller. It's going to do sound, which we may not care about, so I'm going to remove the sound adapter. You can add things like other hard disks or other floppies. We're going to take the floppy disk off as well, virtual floppy. Okay, and we could change any of these settings we just set up through the wizard as well. All right. So we're going to hit finish, and it's going to power on this virtual machine. We've got that ISO of the Windows 7 install disk plugged in, so it should fire right up with the installation of Windows 7. So here the installation has fired off. If we go to our host operating system and browse to where we said to put that virtual machine, we can see here's the virtual hard disk that we're creating. You can see it's getting to a size here that's going to be big. Here's the virtual memory. We don't have to worry about that. But if we refresh this, you can see that this is getting bigger because it's actually loading some things on here, or it will once we start. So here we're starting up the install of the virtual machine. So as it's starting up, it's going to go through just like a basic Windows installation, except for it's within this virtualized environment instead. So if we go here, you can see this is getting larger as it's copying some of these files over. Okay, so at this point we just go through with the install. All right, so we finished the install of Windows 7 here, so we can go ahead and log in. and for some reason our account's been disabled. All right, let me open. Okay, we'll have to troubleshoot that later, but that's the basic install of a virtual machine. At this point, if this were to open, we could do things like go and install VMware tools, and that's just going to bring up a wizard here to install some drivers specific to VMware. But at this point, we could have multiple virtual machines running at the same time. You just click the virtual machine you want, and click play if it's paused, and you can run it again. When you're done with the virtual machine, you can either shut it down like a regular operating system, or you can hit the pause button, which is basically like putting it to sleep. You can see now that inside of our host operating system, this disk is rather large. For Windows 7, we've got 7 gig of space. So these are going to be some pretty big files that you're going to use. So we've got it set up where we can utilize and use virtual machines from different operating systems. We could go and if we wanted to change in the settings like RAM, things that you would need to turn a computer off to set up, we can do that by shutting down the virtual machine. So if I actually start this one, you come and shut it down. If you ever get stuck where your mouse is stuck inside the virtual machine, you can see here it tells you that if you just press Control and Alt, it will let the mouse leave the screen. But if you have the tools installed, it shouldn't do that. And for some reason, I'm stuck without a mouse because the Macintosh keyboard doesn't like Control and Alt on it. But it should let me out here in a minute, as soon as this system halts. Okay, so we've got our virtual machines turned off. At this point, if we want to change any of the settings, we can just say Edit Virtual Machine Settings, and we can change things like the memory that we have allocated to it, etc. So other things like network connections, ISO disks that are attached, we can change those things while the virtual machine is running. Again, it's just like a physical machine. So you can put in a new disk at any time without rebooting the system. You can change the network connections without rebooting the system. And the same thing goes for a virtual machine as well. So if we want to start one up, we just hit the Start button, and it's going to start our virtual machine right up, and then we're ready to go. So if you're in the lab and you don't want to install a new virtual machine, let's say you've got one already that you wanted to just make a copy of, what you can do is you can actually you can see it puts all the files just in one folder. You can actually go and simply copy a virtual machine, and there are some already pre-installed on the lab machine. You can go to your external drive and then right-click and paste that. It's going to paste that whole folder there. At that point, you can then go and open that virtual machine that you copied over. And it's going to be this VMX file. And it'll ask you when you started if you copied it or moved it. See if Windows still has me disabled. It does. Maybe it's because I didn't put a license code in there. All right, so you can alter the network settings with removable devices. Disconnect the network or go to the settings and change the settings of the network card so you can change it to NAT from bridged, etc. You could change which disks, so if you wanted to install something else, you can go and plug in a physical disk or go find a new ISO that you wanted to attach to that, etc. You could also do that down here, so you can change the disk by double-clicking the CD icon. You can change the network by double-clicking the network icon, etc. So here's a Windows Server 2003. If you get stuck here where you need a Control-Alt-Delete, you actually will need a Control-Alt-Insert for VMware Workstation to do the Control-Alt-Delete, because if you hit Control-Alt-Delete, it's going to think you're talking about the host. So the alternative is to click VM and say send Control-Alt-Delete. You can also go to the properties of the virtual machine by going to the properties of the tab. I like doing that, and you can find out, okay, how's the network set up. So you can see I could come here and access the internet if I wanted to, just like any other virtual machine or any other physical machine. Okay. So here I can come, you can see actually this is the icon that VMware tools are installed on this system. What I can do is say update the VMware tools. And this is basically just going to run this software to add new drivers to this virtual machine. That's going to walk through that. A couple other nice things about a virtual machine. We can create snapshots, which are basically like point-in-time backups. And so this is advisable to do before you install something major or after you do something major to your virtual machine. And so if something gets messed up with the virtual machine, you can always roll it back to the last kind of saved setting or any of the saved settings, snapshots that you've created. To do that, you go to the virtual machine, say VM snapshot, take snapshot. So I could say Windows 7 install. Okay, and so it's set up. So if I do something like, I could also kill the power. And again, it's not advisable because it's like a regular physical machine killing the power. But instead of starting it up where I might get errors, I could simply go back to the snapshot where it was already started. And there it's back to where it began. So we could go around and make sure that we've got everything set, take a snapshot, and we could take as many as we wanted to and always come back to that point in time. All right, let's see what else we got up here. A clone, so before I showed you how we could copy a virtual machine by just copying the folder, we could also go to a virtual machine and go to clone, and it does the same thing basically as copying the folder over. Maybe it's a little bit cleaner. So you could clone the full virtual machine or an existing snapshot of the virtual machine, whatever you want to do. And you would just go through this and tell it where you wanted to put the clone of the virtual machine. And I think that's it. If you have any questions about how to use VMware, feel free to ask me or one of the lab assistants. They've been using this for a while. I guess that's it. Good luck.